Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Bradburn. Alongside me is Logan Camden, and today we are going to be finishing our rankings of the top 30 players in the NBA with our top 10. We took a brief break from this list to do a show that I thought was really awesome with Kenny Beecham, King of the Fourth Quarter, last Friday. So if you haven't checked that one out, please do. Super awesome to have him on. We did some trivia, we talked some ball, but now we're back to the grind of ranking these players and making some hard decisions, Logan. I know that we only disagree on one of the players who is in our top 10. I'm sure we'll disagree on a bunch of placements, but there's only one difference in terms of a guy you have in the top 10 who I do not, and vice versa. I know that because we discussed that a little bit last episode, but who ends up in your 10 spot?
I have a guy I had a very hard time ranking, and that's just because of what an anomaly he is. Everybody likes to call Jayson Tatum the anomaly. This guy's the real anomaly.
Well, handles like a guy 6 inches shorter, guards 1 through 5. That's an anomaly if you ask me.
The real anomaly is the guy who's 7'3" to 4" with an 8-foot wingspan. They also call him an alien. I've got Victor Wembanyama here in my number 10 spot, and he is a one-man defense as much as any man can be. The San Antonio Spurs this season were 10.3 points per 100 possessions better defensively with Wemby. They have a defensive rating of 112.4 with him on the court and a one of 122.7 without him. That's equivalent to the difference between being the 12th best defense in basketball and the worst defense in all of basketball. This season, he averaged 3.8 blocks per game. He held down the number one spot by 1.3 over second place, to be clear, and he also had 1.1 steals per game. That's the 22nd most stocks per game by any player in NBA history, the most by a player since 2002. That was four-time Defensive Player of the Year Ben Wallace. Wemby is a monster, and I also think that while I think he is the greatest defensive prospect ever, I think he is a bona fide Defensive Player of the Year, probably front runner for every single year that he's going to be healthy moving forward the rest of his career. He really has improved in a lot of ways offensively. He averaged 24 points this year, 4 assists on 59% true shooting. He was the number 19 pick-and-roll man in all of basketball. I think you saw him benefit from better guard play this season, finishing stuff easier, getting it manufactured for him. But he's also got really good touch and, just fluidity for a guy his size. He's a good post scorer right now. He's not a great one, but I think he can improve and get better there. But that was what ultimately his offensive game and my confidence in his offensive game is what holds him from being higher on this list. There are other guys that I just wholeheartedly trust more as number ones and offensive engines, and there are other guys that I just think have comparable defensive impact or all-around impact that are also really, really reliable offensive players. That being said, it feels like we've gotten robbed again, Carson. It really sucks that he got injured. That's the measuring stick, I think for a lot of people in the NBA right now is we love seeing what these young guys can do in the regular season, but the true test is what you can do in the playoffs, and this is going to be the second consecutive season where he misses out. Hopefully it's the last one. Next year, I think the Spurs have to be a shoo-in to be a top 8 team with Fox, with whoever they're going to get very early in the draft, but I want to see him on that stage. That being said, I think I'm relatively confident that it's going to translate pretty well over into the playoffs, but there are things that I think that you can do to defend Wemby to slow him down. He is a little bit reliant on the perimeter shot right now. You can put smaller defenders on him that can disrupt his handle. Guys with a lower center of gravity and a strong base can really give him fits and keep him out of the paint. And so those are the shortcomings that I'm talking about, but still, when you've got this kind of wingspan, you can finish anything around the rim. He is a good shooter with great touch. I do think it's going to translate relatively. There's just other more experienced guys, and like I said, guys that I think impact the game a little bit better right now than Wemby, but it's only a matter of time, right? Wemby's going to be top 5, I think, one day, if he can, shake off this injury and get back fully healthy, and I'm praying to the basketball gods that happens, but I just need to see more. But this is a super impressive year, too. We talked all last year about when he would break into it, if it was going to be this year, if it was going to be next year. I think he's about on schedule, and right now 10 feels right for Wemby.
Wemby's a tough guy to rank because obviously we didn't get to see him finish out this season, but he is improving so rapidly. We have a smaller sample size of basically everything with him than we do anybody else, and we don't get to see him face what is the biggest and most significant test this year, which is a postseason, and specifically how does his offense hold up in that playoff environment against high-level defenses that are game planning for his offense, trying to take his strengths away. But of course, offense is always going to be secondary with Wemby because he's probably already the best defensive player alive. He was going to win Defensive Player of the Year. You mentioned the shot blocking numbers. It's stuff that we haven't seen in decades, holding opposing players 13% below their average field goal percentage at the rim. He is, to me, the most impactful deterrent in basketball today. Just people not even wanting to test him at the rim. His ability to negate those attempts around the basket is so valuable. And he improved the Spurs defense by 10 points per 100 possessions when he was on the floor. So extremely, extremely impactful defensive player. And then offensively, still a really, really good basketball player. You mentioned the production. The efficiency has improved. He's significantly improved as a jump shooter. That was the biggest difference, arguably, in his game offensively from his second year compared to his first, just getting way better from beyond the arc and even increasing his volume there. I do think he's improved as a post player. I do think that he's added strength, which is significant. And I thought he did a really impressive job carrying the Spurs throughout this regular season when he was healthy. Before the Fox trade, the Spurs were 21-25 with Wemby this year. That overachieved my expectations looking at the talent they had on the roster. I will say they're 10-14 without him, which is definitely better than I would have expected, but I do think that he is certainly like a top 8 regular season player. I just think the night-to-night effort that you get from him, that number one defensive impact while still being a guy who gives you offensive star production on a night-to-night basis in the regular season, like that's very, very valuable. And that's why earlier in the year, I was saying Victor Wembanyama is a top 8 player. The thing is, at that time, Steph and LeBron were not looking like the guys who they've been for the last month or couple months, and those guys are still just at such a superstar offensive level. They are so proven against playoff defenses. I mean, they're just basketball geniuses who are so reliably elite in that highly difficult environment. When they're playing like they have been and they've shown that they can get to that level for extended stretches, I still just have to reward that reliably elite offense. Because you mentioned it, the one question about Wemby is, how does he hold up right now offensively in a playoff series? And I do think there are a couple of indicators that it would not have been as pretty as his overall regular season production would suggest. When Victor Wembanyama faced top 10 defenses this year, he only gave you 20 points per game, more than 3 turnovers, which is still a struggle for him, on under 54% true shooting. And you touched on what is the key strategy that he is going to see in the playoffs until he proves that he can punish you for it, and that is teams putting a wing, a big forward, even a super feisty smaller wing on Victor Wembanyama, applying a lot of pressure to him, affecting him with their lower center of gravity in their hands, and then having their center roaming off so he can be constantly engaged as a helper and take away shots at the rim for the entire Spurs offense. Wemby struggled in those matchups. We saw the Rockets do it effectively. They have dogs, right, like a Dillon Brooks who can actually handle Wemby pretty well one-on-one. We saw the Thunder do it, even in minutes where Chet was off the floor entirely, and they were going fully small ball, and they were guarding Wemby effectively with their perimeter guys and their collective speed and rim protection. We've seen the Grizzlies do it. We've seen the Celtics do it in Wemby's most recent game where they're putting Horford on him, they're putting Tatum on him, and they have KP roaming off. He just, to me, needs to add that more reliable self-creation still. And I think that part of that is strength, where he can attack these mismatches. He can punish them by working on the interior more, working down low more. I don't know that you can ever expect a 7'3" guy to become like legitimately comfortable handling out on the perimeter against some of these swarming smaller guys. Like Wemby already has an unprecedented handle for his size, but there's only so much you can expect of a guy at that height. So I don't think that that's necessarily where he's going to improve as much. It's more, to me, getting comfortable playing with real physicality, playing some more bully ball, and Wemby doesn't have that yet. So that's why I have him here. The turnovers, the inefficiency, the lack of scoring volume against those really good teams. I would also like to see Wemby get to the line more. Like 4 free throw attempts for a big with his sort of crazy physical tools is a very low number, and that would help his efficiency if he got more of those free points at the line, and that'll come with added physicality, added aggression, just getting more shots at the rim if those are shots that he's creating for himself or shots that are being created for him. But it will help him when he gets more of that super easy stuff that he's just not getting at as high a rate as he's capable of yet. And I do still think that he is dependent on other players creating offense for him much more than anybody else that we're going to talk about today. Now, he's pretty easy to create offense for because he is such a pick and pop weapon, and because as a roller, I mean, the guy is just massive and fluid in a way that we've never seen before. So he's crazy efficient finishing at the rim. He's such a massive target down there. He's a good screener. But if you look at like his minutes with Chris Paul, best pure point guard he's played with, right? Just in terms of facilitating the game. Compared to the minutes where he's without Chris Paul, in the minutes without CP3, he only gives you under 21 points per 75 possessions, 54% true shooting. The turnovers go up. So it's just a lack of offensive polish. That's the only reason I can't have him higher. Regular season, with his monstrous two-way impact, he would be higher. But ultimately, I do value the playoffs more. I think that is where players are tested most. I think that's where their flaws are exposed. People try to take away their greatest strengths, and that's where I just trust a couple guys more than Wemby. I do think by next year he should be top 5. He gets better so fast, got so much better throughout his rookie year, got way better throughout his sophomore year, and has literally all the ability in the world. So I'm just expecting a continual dramatic upward slope for him. Right now, though, I'm comfortable with him at number 10 as well.
And I think, depending on how this stuff goes with him being out, like, I wouldn't put it past him putting on even more weight and getting stronger by next season, too, which is what you're talking about. Because I do think that's the fully unlocked version of Wemby, just where he can not even necessarily, get to the low block or get to the left or right block, every single time. He literally just needs to not be able to back down to these guys and not be moved off his spots, because once that happens, he can shoot over the top of anybody. But it's such a simple thing, but once he establishes that part where he can't be bumped, he can't be moved, he's just, for lack of a better term, he's backing his ass up into the dude and just moving him. Then he'll be able to face up and just shoot over the top of anybody, and that's when I think you're really going to see him take an uptick in efficiency and just get easy stuff, and where he can break up spells where it's not just, I need my 3-ball to be on to be super effective, or I need guys feeding me. I can go to the post. I can go and get my own shot, and then that's going to unlock everything else for Wemby in this offense and unlock his full potential as an offensive player, because off of that, once you can individually get to that spot, then you're drawing extra attention. Then you're creating advantages. You're getting the defense in rotation. You can make out of that. I think it's going to unlock all of Wemby's offensive game once he establishes that part. But like you said, right now we're just not there. But I wouldn't put it past Wemby real quick, in the blink of an eye, in a couple of months, being there.
I totally agree. I think that strength is such a key, just that comfort, not being moved off his spots, asserting himself physically, because where Wemby is least efficient as an offensive player is as an isolationist. He's only in the 16th percentile, and why is that? Again, if you have the sort of feisty wings or forwards who we're talking about, you can force him to settle a lot. And Wemby's a 40% mid-range shooter, and you can force him into some turnovers, and that's why he's just not the most impactful offensive player yet. And you see that with the numbers too. The Spurs offensive rating does not change if Wemby's on the floor compared to off it this year. Now, I definitely think he's a plus offensively, but I do think that that's telling. Massive defensive on-off differential, not there offensively. I am excited to see how he and Fox can establish their two-man game, how Fox's quickness and downhill threat, even though he's not weaponizing that as much as I would like, can open up things for Wemby as a popper and maybe as a roller as well. And I just think he's always going to be at his best offensively when he is allowed to play a more efficient role and he has guards creating stuff for him, because his physical tools there and his skill is so overwhelming. It's harder to ask a guy with his size and his frame to create for himself at that high volume, but he is going to have to get better there for me to move him up higher and have real faith in him in the playoffs offensively. Who is in your number 9 spot, Logan?
I played with having this guy up to number 7, and I thought I was going to have him higher, but ultimately I decided against it. I have my beautiful, darling baby boy, Anthony Edwards, in here at number 9.
Above Wemby, wow.
I do, just for right now. And I think it's only a matter of time. I also think it's only a matter of time that some of these old guys dwindle down, and Ant and Wemby both are going to be there.
We keep saying that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe LeBron will play until he's fucking 50 and he'll still be there. Ultimately, that's what I was deciding with is at this point, I just couldn't do it. As much as I love Anthony Edwards, I just thought about it and I said, I can't take. I would still want LeBron. And it mostly has to do with the playoffs because I think that's important. Because I think if you're adding in the argument that it's 82 games and the playoffs, which is how I'm thinking about it, I think that some of the younger guys have an advantage, but I do value the playoffs more. And it still has a few areas to get really refined before I can have him higher on this list. One, it's really just the intermediate area because what I always envisioned Ant being was this crazy downhill force, this downhill presence, this one-of-one athlete that can explode and fly by anybody if you don't have the right defensive personnel to match up with him. And then he was going to couple it with this elite pull-up jump shooting, and that's what we've had this year. He is still every bit of that downhill presence. Now, he doesn't get downhill as often because some of the spacing issues, I think he's just more confident as a jump shooter too, where he's willing to just pull more often. He's got the green light. But Ant still can, at will, get there. But he's an elite jump shooter now. He is, I read out this stat I think a while back on the show, but it really is remarkable. He's one of 4 players in NBA history to shoot over 40% from deep on over 10 threes a game. That list includes Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, and Klay Thompson, and the 4th guy is Anthony Edwards. That's it. That's the entire list. Those are 3 of the game's greatest shooters ever. And to people who may go, oh, it's unsustainable, it's a 1 year off, maybe this is the best it ever gets. Sure, you might be right. I don't think so. I think Ant's going to be one of the greatest shooters ever. Is he going to be Klay, Dame, Steph? I can't say that. They're anomalies. Those guys are freaks of nature. Can Ant be a top 20, a top 10 shooter? Yeah, I think he can. Like, the way he practices on it, like, this has been such a focal point of his development and such a key area where he's worked to get better at that I think this is sustainable, where he's going to be a 38% plus shooter on high volume for a long time, which is excellent. And with how you have to play a guy like Ant, because you have to sag off of him and give him that cushion, he's going to be able to get those shots really easily. Like, that's just how guys play him, because if you play up on him, he's going to blow right by you and get to the rim. The reason he can't be higher is those very specific areas of his offensive game where I need to see more development. I think he's gotten better as a playmaker, but it's inconsistent. Some nights Ant will be a world beater with his playmaking, and he's getting downhill, and he's getting extra defensive attention. Other nights he's not as solid. Mm-hmm. The intermediate area really is where he struggles scoring the ball, though. He's a 36% mid-range shooter, I think, right now, and that's an area where he does take a fair amount of shots. Like, he settles in that area. He's just not a good shooter, and you can have outliers. He's not a great intermediate shooter. I think he's a great perimeter shooter right now, but it's really that touch in that area because you'll see it. That's how guys will play him. They'll load up the paint. You know, if it's Gobert or if it's Randall or something like that, they'll take that away, and then his counter is to stop and pop, and that's just the least efficient shot in his arsenal right now, and teams can force him to settle for it sometimes. And I don't think I think there's only so impactful that a defensive guard can be on that end too, because, right, some people will argue two-way value, he should be higher than some guys that aren't as impactful. I think he is a good defensive guard. I think sometimes he can get a little overrated. And also, I just think, again, there's a limitation to how great your impact can be on a team defense when you play guard. But I think Ant's going to continue to get better. This feels right now, though. I just think there are more guys that impact the game in a more well-rounded they're just more impactful in totality on defense and in offense. And I thought Ant was going to be higher for me, man. I'm a little disappointed. I wanted to have him higher. There's just guys that I trust more, veterans of the game that I trust a little bit more right now than Ant. And situation is important, I think, to mention. I always mention this with Ant, but I really do think he'd be more efficient. I think we'd see him have a more pronounced impact on offense if he wasn't in such a bad offensive situation. But the Wolves have looked better. You know, McDaniels is figuring it out. Julius Randle's playing team ball right now. I'm not going to buy in and say that it's like a great offensive situation, but it's better than it was at the beginning of this year, and I think Ant has looked better too during this last stretch. So I don't know, Carson. I can't even say with confidence. We're talking about Wemby figuring out these things and what it's going to take for him to get to the next level. I don't know, man. I don't know how long Ant is going to struggle with these things, right? He added the three-point shot to his bag, but I'm just not as confident as, like, penciling it in, right? Like, with Wemby, I can pretty easily see it.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that trajectory is going to be for Ant with the and these are things on the margins, right? I would gladly take Ant as my number one. I want to be clear about that, but they are things that make a difference here in the top 10. I just can't say with like a certain confidence that he's going to figure it out by next season and be a great playmaker or have the intermediate touch. As easy as I can see it with Wemby.
I couldn't say that these things are on the margins. I mean, I do think that they're important. Obviously, he has an insane foundation with what he is athletically.
Yeah, he is such
a three-point shooter.
Exactly. He has such elite traits at the top that these are the needles in the haystack, so to speak.
But, like, that's understating it to me because they're really important. I mean, your playmaking is extremely important if you want to be a star guard, and Ant is still certainly below basically all the offensive players who I have in my top 10 as decision makers. Talking about the offense first, guys. That's why I have Ant at number 11. You mentioned the intermediate shot making, which he's always lacked in his game. He's only 38% on 2-pointers outside the restricted area. That is a really bad number. The playmaking is inconsistent with him. I think that there's a lack of faith in his teammates that he's going to have to work through. And so overall offensively, he's just not comparable yet to these like absolute bona fide veteran superstars who have the polish of a Kevin Durant, of a LeBron James, of a Steph Curry, who have that sort of efficiency, who think the game at such a high level, who can be so effective on and off ball. That's basically what it comes down to. That's why I have Ant outside my top 10.
I think the rim pressure that Ant can have in a single series and how he can just
But it's
explode.
Matchup dependent how much Ant actually gets downhill. Like, he's not top 10 in the league in drives. You put him up against the Nuggets, and they can't contain him at the point of attack, and they don't have the backline defense. He will eat them alive.
You and I both know that that's really situational dependent, that number, though. I mean, that would be way up if he wasn't playing with
Dude, you say that, but there are guys who play with shitty spacing and still are consistently getting rim pressure and are getting into the lane over and over again. We've seen it with SGA in weird lineups. We've seen it with Brunson in bad offensive lineups. Like those guys who can just slither and change pace at an elite level and carve their way to whatever spot they want to get to, get downhill more consistently than a insane straight line athlete like Ant.
But I think that's underselling the change of pace, and like Ant has that. Like,
not
he can do all those
comparable to SGA and Brunson. Dude, in terms
of
change in pace and slitheriness,
some of the stuff that Ant does, I'm not going to put him on SGA's level, but dude, how low Ant gets to the ground, like, I don't know, man. I think you're underselling it a little bit, and I think a lot of this comes because teams don't have to respect the big man. They don't have to respect Gobert. They can send this extra attention. I think a lot of this is matchup dependent, but I think you're underselling Ant's ability to blow by guys. That's why he's a tier 1 guy to me and in the top 10, is because if you don't have that guy that can stop him at the point of attack, you're talking about it's matchup dependent. A lot of teams don't have a guy to match up with him. The Nuggets are one of them, but you got to have that guy, and I think a lot of teams don't have an answer for Ant.
Here's what I would say. Anthony Edwards, the last season before he started playing with Rudy Gobert, was 40-something in the NBA in drives. I think that you overstate. He was an all-star. He was a star basketball player.
I mean, he's 20, 21.
Yeah, okay, but Logan, it hasn't gotten significantly better than that. Like, he's still consistently outside the top 15. With his athletic traits, you would think this is a guy who gets all the way downhill more. This is a guy who gets to the line at a meteoric rate. But it's never been the case to the extent that I think you're saying it would be if not for Rudy Gobert. Like, I'm not saying that he does not have the ability to be an insane rim pressure, but I am saying he is not consistently a top-tier rim pressurer. He's not. And that's not just because of situation. That's been consistent with him. And there's just a different level of offensive maturity, man. Like, the shot making that I'm getting, the playmaking I'm getting from these dudes who have been doing it for decades is crazy.
The reason Ant is in the top 10 to me is because he is one of those dudes in a playoff series that I think can be big dog. I think he can be top dog in a playoff series. I think he can outplay your number one because he's a psychotic competitor, a killer. He's got that instinct. I want that guy on my team every single day, and I think he's always going to scale well and get better in the playoffs because he's a gamer. And I know that's a lot of cliche stuff, but I truly believe all that about Ant, and I think he's only going to get better with time. I don't know, man. I know we always disagree on Ant, and I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I think we're going to see it again, man. I wouldn't want to play that dude in the playoff series. We'll see how he plays this year. I think it's going to be comparable to the first 2 rounds of last year, or maybe even better, man. I think Ant's that kind of player.
You're a huge Ant guy. I know it. And by the way, I love Ant too. I just feel like sometimes I'm trying to be sort of the balancing out of your extreme enthusiasm with him. I am still preferring either just like an absolute two-way monster like Wemby, who is so transformative on the defensive end and then still so good offensively, or again, the sort of offensive super established giants like Steph Curry in my number 9 spot. Steph, another hard guy to rank. Logan's acting shocked. Here's the reason that I don't have Steph higher, and I don't know how high you're going to have him. I just cannot say that he is as reliably great offensively night after night, regardless of situation, as he was a couple years ago or as the guys who I have higher on my list are. I mean, I still think that he's a top 5 offensive player on the planet, but there are guys who are close offensively, but then bring more defensive impact, right? Like, Steph has regressed, man. I know that he is on an absolute heater as of late. He has been phenomenal with Jimmy Butler. The Dubs are 15-2 when those guys play together. Steph averages 27.5 points per game on over 66% true shooting. But before Jimmy, the Dubs were 19-24. Steph was giving you 23 points per game on under 60% true shooting. Now, I feel like I was very vocal about the fact that before the Jimmy trade, Steph was in a bad situation offensively, and he was still dramatically improving that situation, and he was asked to carry a load night after night that just was not possible for him at his age. But that is a component in this, right? Like, Steph has lost some on-ball juice. We've seen that over the last couple years. He took a step back last year, and then he took another step back this year where he's only a 57th percentile pick-and-roll scorer. He's a 48th percentile isolation scorer. Those are numbers that even a couple years ago and throughout his prime were consistently both better than 90th percentile. Like, he does not get to the rim. Didn't last year either. And he's just not creating space on ball at the same level that he was a few years ago because he's lost some of that quickness. So that means that because he has lost something on ball, his consistency has taken a hit. Steph has 11 games with 15 points or fewer this year. He has some like horribly ugly performances against Memphis, against Boston, where he is actually giving you 2 points, right? Struggling to even get shots up and cannot make shots. Obviously, he's looked like a different player since Jimmy was brought in. And I think that he's been more energized and he's been more dynamic, and he has very much been aided by having another high-level scoring threat on the floor and having a really great connective playmaker like Jimmy, an athlete like Jimmy, who enhances him in a number of ways. And obviously, like, Steph's gravity and shooting still unmatched. That's why he's as high as he is. That's why he is such a dominant offensive player. And he's improved the Warriors' offense by 11 points per 100 possessions when he's on the floor compared to off it. But, like, I think it matters seeing what he looks like in a bad situation, because the dudes above him, simply put, I think would probably be more consistent because they have more of that dynamic on-ball creation at this stage that's dropped off for Steph. I still think that he is a phenomenal ceiling raiser. I think he makes everybody around him better offensively, but there are guys who are more consistently impactful as two-way players, because that's where Steph is up there for the least impactful guy on this list. I mean, Steph obviously has major defensive limitations. That's why I have him down here. I love how high the highs have been, but I can't ignore that the lows were lower than basically anybody else who we're going to talk about today.
So, I guess I had mine kind of situationally dependent. Like, I do knock Ant because I don't think he's amplified by his situation. I don't really knock that Steph wasn't good before Jimmy Butler. I think it's important that we see what he looks like there, but I think he's so much like, I think he's amplified so much by now having Jimmy and Dre there that, like, I don't want to just completely wipe it away, but I think he's enhanced by this situation now to where I'm confident in having him higher on this list. I've got Steph at number 6. Like, I just still think he's that kind of offensive player that, like I was saying with Ant, like Steph's still that guy that number 1 can just big dog you in a playoff series and take over in a way that nobody else can. And I get some of the on-ball juice stuff, but he's still one of the most effective off-ball scorers in basketball. He's the number 15 of all time.
He's the greatest off-ball player of all time. Number 1. Yeah.
He's the number 13 cutter in the NBA, averaging 1.46 points per cut. He's the number 15 spot-up scorer in the league, minimum 2 possessions a game, 1.28 points per spot-up possession. And with Jimmy, he's given you 27, 4, and 5 on 48, 41, 91, 66% true shooting since he came over. I get that Steph has lost a little something, that he doesn't get to the rim as much anymore. I still think Steph's a tier 1 offensive player, a guy that completely shapes the opposing team's defense, that you have to game plan specifically for him. I think with the introduction of Jimmy, that I have more confidence that he's going to be consistent on a night-to-night basis. And maybe I shouldn't take situation into account, but I do. And I think that now that Jimmy's here, I'm just more confident that Steph's going to play better and not have as many of these stinkers. Obviously, I don't think he's the same player that he was in his prime, but I'm still very, very scared of Steph Curry. And he's, again, a tier 1 offensive guy that I want on my basketball team. One of the guys that I have below Steph, I don't think is a tier 1 offensive player. The other guy, I just wouldn't rather have for all 82 games in a playoff run. An individual game is an interesting conversation, but I side with Steph otherwise.
I can't have Steph as a tier 1 offensive player. I mean, it's kind of hard because realistically, I think that tier 1 of offensive players right now is only Nikola Jokic. I couldn't actually put anybody else in a tier. But if I were to expand it, be more generous, then the next 2 guys for me would be SGA and Luka, because they are such dominant offensive players who have such consistency in terms of their floor raising. Now, Steph is still a great offensive floor raiser. It just looks different, right? It's not going to be as much with on-ball volume, running a ton of pick and roll. It's going to be, hey, I'm drawing multiple defenders away from the ball, and that's getting somebody else open. And that is extremely valuable offensively. We've seen that throughout his entire career, and we saw that even before Jimmy got there this year. But I do feel like you are ignoring how he looked in suboptimal offensive circumstances too much if you have him
suboptimal. I think is underselling it.
Terrible.
I mean, it was offensive hell.
But Kevin Durant's been an offensive hell, and I think that Kevin Durant has been much more consistent throughout
offensive
this year.
Hell?
Yeah, dude.
I don't think it's comparable with Steph, what he was dealing with. I mean, KD had Devin Booker.
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know.
And
the Suns'
Devin
roster
Booker
is so much worse in totality. I guess offensively, okay, sure. But, like, the point is, like, KD didn't have a lull. KD didn't have a 2-month stretch where people are saying, oh, yeah, he's washed. He didn't have a game where he had 2 points.
I mean,
and, like,
he's got an
I think that you have
player.
to judge these guys in all situations. I think that this is all a combination of your value for the 82-game regular season and your value for the playoffs. It's a combination of your value in a good situation as a ceiling raiser and your value in a bad situation as a floor raiser. And I still think Steph was getting too much criticism earlier in the year, but 6 is just really high, in my opinion, especially because of one guy who I think is still at his peak, who is such a dominant two-way force. I can't say that with Steph's inconsistency as an on-ball scorer, that I would take this version of him.
That's. I mean, I have them separated by 1 spot.
Yeah, it's just a little high. I love Steph. He's one of my favorite players ever, but I think you got to acknowledge the lows and the highs, and I think that there are just guys with more consistent floors at this point. And there are guys who just have more overwhelming physical advantages that is a big part of that. He's Steph Curry, obviously. He's 1 of 1 in his off-ball value, in his gravity, but he is more singularly dependent on that, much more than he was even a couple years ago when you felt like, he can just assassinate you out of pick and roll for an entire playoff run like he was doing even in 2023. He's looked great as of late, but he's more situationally dependent than he has been before, in my opinion. So that's why I have him down at number 9. Who do you have at number 8, Logan?
I would hear an argument for still that this guy is top 5, depending on what your criteria is. I have LeBron James in my number 8 spot, and like I was mentioning earlier, I think that this is implied that this is for an 82-game season and for a playoff run. That being said, like the caveat I just added at the beginning, LeBron James is still a top 5 player I would want for a single game or a playoff series. No doubt in my mind. Like, him or Tatum, I'd be sitting there like, damn, I don't really know, man. Like, 82 games in a playoff run, it's pretty clear to me that I would want JT for all of it, because JT's going to give me 100% every single game, right? And LeBron can still crank it up into that, high gear. He can still pop the clutch when he needs to, and that's why I would hear an argument. So for a single game or a playoff series, LeBron's coming off the board. He's way higher than this, but in the full context of a regular season and a playoff run, he is here at number 8. That being said, the level that LeBron was at over these past few months before getting injured was ridiculous, and I think honestly underrated for this whole season, just to still be doing this at the ripe age of 40, man. LeBron's aging like fine wine. Over the course of the season, 25, 8, and 9 on 52, 38, 76 splits, 61% true shooting. LeBron was still the number 19 isolation scorer in the NBA, the number 15 post scorer in the NBA this season. Less efficient than last year, where he was really great at mismatch attacking, but still an efficient player. The number that blew my mind the most, Carson, everybody was talking about LeBron locking up and playing great defense, and we saw it. He came up with some classic chase down blocks, like some big moments, stuff like that. LeBron was the number 1 isolation defender in basketball this season with no minimum possessions defended per game. He was allowing 0.38 points per isolation possession defended. Like, that's ridiculous to me. So you're still getting all of that impact with LeBron when he's fully locked in and engaged. You're getting an elite shooter of the basketball. You're getting the smartest player, I think, to ever play this game. You're getting a guy that can be an elite defender when he needs to. It's the same thing that we've always said about LeBron. It's the picking his spots. But the Olympics, to me, they weren't that long ago, and LeBron dominated on the global stage. And, those are individual game formats. And, again, in those kind of formats, in a playoff individual game context, there's no doubt in my mind that LeBron should and would be higher on my list. But the only reason that he can't be higher is that night-to-night impact. That I know that LeBron just can't exert himself like he did when he was still in the league 20 years ago. He's 40.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'm walking when I'm 40, Carson. That's ridiculous, man.
No, you won't be, and you won't be seeing a goddamn thing, and I'll be carrying you around everywhere like my little baby. I've already got it all planned out. It's going to be just great. I have LeBron at number 8 as well. In a lot of ways, I have some similar dilemmas ranking him that I do with Steph, which is that when things are good, these guys have shown that they can reach an incredibly high level. But am I going to get the consistent elite value over the entire course of an 82-game season from them that I am from some younger guys who just have more juice night after night? No, because just like Steph had a stretch of the season where he was struggling in terms of his scoring volume and efficiency and was not playing like a top 10 guy, LeBron started out this season not playing like a top 10 guy, certainly. I mean, his first 25 games this year, he was giving you 22 points per game on 57% true shooting, below league average efficiency, or basically league average efficiency. He was mostly bad defensively, and his team was way worse with him on the floor. But then, since then, now more than half of the season, he's giving you 27, 8, and 8 on 63% true shooting, and he's been engaged defensively, and he's been a plus there. You said elite defensively. I could not go that far. I just think with his regression guarding the perimeter, his regression in terms of foot speed there, I couldn't say elite, but definitely plus. I mean, with his IQ, with his activity on rotations, what he can do as a low man and a defensive rebounder. LeBron is a good defender when he wants to be, and he's mostly wanted to be for more than half of the season now. So that's the struggle with him. That's the struggle with Steph, in my opinion. These guys who are all-time great players who still have such high highs, but they do have lower lows than some other guys. That being said, I still gave them both the edge over Wemby just because I do have that much more faith in them offensively in a playoff environment. But it does matter to me that LeBron cannot carry a team throughout a regular season at this stage. In his minutes this year, without Luka or AD on the floor, whoever his superstar teammate is, the Lakers are a -3 net team. Specifically when AD was still on the team. I mean, the differential between the only AD minutes, where the Lakers were actually a really good team. They were +8 in terms of net rating, compared to the only LeBron minutes when they were a really bad team. They were a -7 net rating team. Like, that was jarring.
It is. I think Luka complements him better, though, and allows him to play a style of basketball that I think just benefits him more at this stage in his career. I get that that shouldn't factor really into the rankings because you're right. They were just better with AD. But I think the style of play that I just think it's better for LeBron at this stage in his career to have a guy that is offensively oriented like Luka that can just take on that burden and allow LeBron to not have to exert himself as much on that end. Like AD could do it, but I think it's more important that you have a guy that can do it from the perimeter and sort of. Luka's a one of one. Like, he's going to make anybody look better, but I don't know. Not that there were redundancies with AD and LeBron, but I just think Luka fit better for the style of basketball that the Lakers and LeBron are playing right now. Like, I
also think LeBron is just playing better. I think LeBron just kicked into a different gear.
I agree with that too, yeah.
But either way, my point is this dude has not been the best player on his team in this regular season, right? I mean, AD was that guy when he was on the Lakers, period. Now, I think there's a strong argument that LeBron has played better than Luka since Luka joined the team, and we have a small sample size of that, and obviously then LeBron got hurt, now he's back. So, like, it's tough to sort of say, but I think we both certainly think going forward, Luka is the best player on that team just with the offensive level that he's at. So that's part of the struggle with ranking LeBron. I think he does need more help around him in a regular season than some of these other guys. And you're talking about, if it were just a single game, I'd have him this much higher. That's why I think this list is a composite of all of these things, right? Of who do I want for a playoff run, who do I want for a single game, but also, like, I need a guy who can carry me through the 82.
100%.
And LeBron is not up to par with some of these other guys on that front, but he's still LeBron James. He is a top-tier passer. He is a top-tier mismatch attacker. He is a top-tier transition player still. He is top-tier in terms of his offensive versatility, his ability now to be a really high-level spot-up player and a knockdown catch-and-shooter, his willingness at times to screen for players, his ability to still kill you out of pick and roll, to play bully ball out of the post, out of isolation, to find defensive weak points and just go through them. Like, he's not driving at the same rate, but when he wants to, he can still impose himself physically with such dominance. And then he's literally peaking as a shot maker. The last 2 years are the best he's ever been as a jump shooter. He's averaging 1.04 points per jumper this year from the mid-range, from beyond the arc. Like, he's the best that he's ever been. So that's why I settle on him here. I know that I trust him more than, say, Wemby. Compared to Steph, I just think LeBron still, with his ability to have that real defensive impact on the game and then offensively to impact it in so many different phases and to be able to athletically still overwhelm you, at least in spots, there's a two-way consistency there that I do think surpasses Steph, even though I think Steph is the more valuable offensive player and certainly has the higher offensive ceiling. LeBron, when he wants to be, is still such an impactful player in every phase of the game, and that's why I have him here. I think that he's regressing, but he's regressing slowly, and these last couple months have been a reflection of the fact that he is still an absolute monster.
Yeah, I still want Steph just because I do value that offensive impact solely. Like, I think that the team impact that he has offensively on a night-to-night basis outweighs the totality. You know, Steph, and I don't want to give him credit for having those stinkers because that is a black mark on his resume, but Steph's always going to have his impact and how a team is defending his teammates and how much attention that he needs. And so I still think that, in my opinion, how I thought about it in my list outweighs what LeBron can give me in spurts. I value Steph's ability to have that impact every single game.
That's larger than the defensive difference to you?
It is.
I don't know, man. Maybe I'm a little bit more scarred than some of the rough Steph nights because I think that it's been so great watching him reach this level, but I also can't forget 2 of 13 against Indiana. I can't forget 0 of 7 against Memphis with 2 points. Like, he was in a hard situation, but those are lows that nobody else on this list has hit. And it's not surprising, for God's sakes. I mean, he's a 37 now year old guard. Like, you're not supposed to still be playing at the level that he is. It's incredible. But maybe that floor being lower concerns me more than it does you. We agree on LeBron at number 8, though. So Anthony Davis, Logan. I've sleuthed that out.
Yeah, I've got AD here. AD was having, I think, a career year. I mean, probably his best since the title run, maybe the best of his career in totality with everything he was doing. Like, AD was figuring it out, man. And I really wanted to see him with Dallas down this last stretch because those first 3 quarters were so good, and then it just all came crashing down. AD really played well this season, and I really hope he can get fully healthy for his sake and for Dallas' sake. He's giving you 26, 12, and 3 on 53, 31, 79 splits, 60% true shooting, with 2.2 blocks per game and 1.3 steals per game. Always gives you immense defensive value. Like, AD is one of those one-man defense kind of guys, the kind of guy that in a playoff series can just blow up whatever the other team is trying to do offensively. He's still that kind of player. And I think what him and Dallas were going to do defensively with those two mammoth guys behind him, Gafford and Lively, if they were able to stay healthy, could have been something special in these playoffs. I think it might have been the best defense in the playoff field had everybody stayed healthy. He's still one hell of a rim protector. He had the 9th best defensive field goal percentage inside 6 feet, holding players 11% below their average. But he was also having a career year scoring the basketball, which is the most important component and why AD is still up this high, because he always brings that defensive value. But night to night, he was giving you such a consistent floor scoring the ball in a way that we hadn't seen from AD, where he was hyper-aggressive. And, we had seen it a little bit over the past couple of years. I don't want to act like this was out of nowhere, but to me, this year was the culmination of all of that coming together. He was the number 10 isolation scorer in basketball. He was the number 11 scorer as a roll man this season. He was the number 13 transition scorer in basketball. It just sucks, man. I hate injuries. I hate when this happens to guys. Like, I felt like AD was having a second peak, so to speak, Carson. Like, we were seeing him really figure it out as an offensive player in how to be super effective night to night and not have that every other Davis shit, not have that every other night where I'm like, oh, is AD? AD, to me, in my opinion, because I've been an AD critic for a long time, it kind of absolved those concerns about his game to me. Is he a perfect offensive player? No, he's not an elite jump shooter. He's not an elite playmaker, but really good screener, really good scorer on the interior, can just bully guys that aren't as big if you don't have a guy that connects him out. Like, he's a physical mismatch. He's a problem on the inside, and he was giving you that consistently offensively in a way that I hadn't felt since the title run with Anthony Davis, to be honest with you. And it's just disappointing that got cut short. And over the past couple of years, he had been better. But I thought this was the year where AD was at his best. And I'm just disappointed, man. Kind of like Wemby, I'm just disappointed we didn't get to see it on the playoff stage.
I do feel like you're underrating Anthony Davis of the last couple years a bit, because I thought he had a huge bounce back season in 2023.
I thought his playoff series last year was really good. I just mean
more
like,
I just thought last year end to end he was phenomenal. I thought he improved as a passer.
I'm just saying, like, 2 years ago and beyond, I'm not going to forget the player that Anthony Davis was, but these past 2 years have been really, really impressive. Like, he had taken a substantial leap up in just consistent impact night to night, where I don't worry about AD disappearing anymore. I don't worry about him doing that act. Like, he had evolved, I felt.
Yeah, I think that where he got even better this year compared to last year, when I think he had gotten even better than the year before, like, AD has managed to actually pretty consistently improve now after he had the really rough 2-year slump in 2021 and 2022 where he's hurt and he just wasn't the same player. He's consistently gotten better, and this year that manifested itself in his improvement from the perimeter. I think that you saw more of those like wing skills from AD. We heard big priority coming into the year was, oh, he's going to be shooting more threes. That didn't end up materializing in like a meaningfully different way. Like, yeah, he took one more 3 a game, but he was only 31% from deep. But I do think he improved as a jump shooter overall. Averaged 0.91 points per jumper compared to 0.83 last year, which was already improvement from where he had been at. And that's an area where he was brutal in his 2-year slump in 2021 and 2022. He just could not make a jumper, couldn't make a 3. Got better there. got more comfortable initiating offense from the perimeter overall, though. Like, you mentioned how brutally efficient he was out of isolation, 87th percentile, just his ability to kill you with his combination of touch, his ball handling at his size. He's become more physical in recent years and improved as a post scorer along with that. But then also as a facilitator, I think he's gotten better. He was a 91st percentile pick and roll creator as a ball handler this year. And this was the first year that that ever became like a legitimate part of his game, running inverted pick and roll, or even having another big screen for him. He ran more than 3 times as much pick and roll this year as last year, and he was really good at it. So his touch is good. It's not elite, but he's 44% in the paint outside the restricted area. He's over 42% for mid-range. He's one of the more gifted bigs in terms of shot making, better there than he's ever been, and his playmaking is better than it's ever been. And then defensively, he's still a top 5 defender on the planet. I would have said, I think I did say even last year when we ranked our best defensive players, that Anthony Davis was number 1.
I think he was number 1 for both of us.
I can't still have him that high because his motor is not consistent enough.
Would you have Mobley over AD now?
I would have Mobley over him. I would have Wemby over him. And then the rest of my top 5 would be Chet and Draymond along with AD. I think when AD wants to be, there is still a case that he's the best defensive player alive because of his ability to play every coverage at such a high level, because of his ability to get out and guard in space and switch onto smaller guys, his ability to play a higher drop coverage and affect pocket passes with his length, his ability to play a true drop coverage, to be an elite pure rim protector, to be an elite rebounder. He forces steals at a rare rate for a big. Like, he has every tool you could conceivably want. The reality is just he is not night after night playing with the sort of effort that a lot of these younger guys are, or even an older guy like Draymond Green. Just leaves it all out there defensively more consistently. Specifically in transition, I thought that AD was bad defensively this year. So that's why I'll say top 5 and not higher than that. But again, he's got all those elite traits. He was holding opposing players 11% below their average field goal percentage at the rim and was clearly the Lakers' best player before they traded him on the year. And I mentioned already, like, the difference of them being a +8 net team with him on and Braun off versus a -7 net team with Braun on and AD off. He's a phenomenal regular season player, dominant two-way force. And over the last 2 postseasons, he has been excellent. Like, 2023, was he as consistent offensively as maybe you would have liked? No, he ends up giving you 23 points per game on 60% true shooting, but there was an on and off aspect to his offensive production, but it was as good a defensive playoff run as I've seen from anybody. What he did to Memphis, just completely taking away the rim, blocking 4 shots a game in that series, and then what he was able to do playing such impressive pick and roll coverage against Steph and limiting the Warriors offense. He was playing like a top 5 sort of guy, maybe just outside of that, even without elite offensive impact night after night. And then last year, we only got the 1 series, but his shot making was out of this world. The touch, the bag from mid-range on these touch shots and hooks and fadeaways, like, he was just crazy. So
I mean, he was
his defense wasn't
Jokic
as great.
on the inside too.
He was getting what he wanted offensively, getting whatever he wanted offensively. So that's what I'm getting with AD. I'm getting an elite defensive anchor. I'm getting an efficient play finisher off the roll who can also really get himself a bucket and has improved there out of the post, out of isolation, even as a pick and roll ball handler. And I think is an underrated passer who's legitimately improved there. It's just that dominant two-way impact that, for me, surpasses what I'm getting even from these older guys who are great offensive players but aren't that consistent compared to AD in terms of their all-around elite impact. And by the way, AD might be back tonight, so that'd be great. I know that obviously Dallas' season is cooked, but I'd love to at least see the guy playing again, because the 3 quarters we got from him in Dallas this year were unbelievable. He was insane.
Yeah, they had recently sent him down to the G League, I think, to like just rehab and open up some roster spots for a little bit. So I hope that it'd be nice to see him on the floor again. Is Kevin Durant included in the older guys that you would have below AD?
Yes, I have AD at number 6.
Okay.
I have him above KD, who I have at number 7. I know that you're low on KD. You had him at number 11. We discussed him versus Ant last show. I just think he is the biggest victim of situation. Well, I can't call him a victim because he chose the situation. And KD is the worst player in NBA history, I would argue, at choosing his situation to play basketball. And he has been greatly punished for that by the basketball gods. However, that does not affect how great he is at basketball. And he is still unbelievable. So I do have him at number 7, and it's very close, my entire 7 through 10 range, him versus Steph and LeBron and Wemby. I think they all have their pros and cons, but KD is still giving you 27, 6, and 4.5 on 64% true shooting. That efficiency is absolutely absurd. It's top 3 among all 20-point per game scorers, only behind Jokic and SGA, who are obviously the only 2 guys in the MVP conversation for this year. One of the things that you mentioned, really the thing that you focused on most when you were criticizing KD, was the fact that he's not getting to the rim at nearly the same rate that he was at his peak. He does not get to the rim at a high level. What I said is that he is better built to overcome that loss in rim pressure than probably any other player in NBA history, because he is the greatest mid-range shooter we've ever seen, because he is one of the greatest jump shooters, period, we have ever seen, and because with his frame at 6'11", he can still get those shots off consistently and make an absurdly efficient percentage of them. The guy shoots over 55% from mid-range, and he shoots 42% from 3. That is elite efficiency offense without getting to the rim that nobody else can replicate. The other thing that nobody else can replicate is the blend of elite on and off ball scoring that I get from Kevin Durant, where he is a top tier spot up player, 87th percentile efficiency, unbelievable catch and shooter, has always had really good feel off ball and been super effective there, but then is also a 93rd percentile isolation scorer, still with his handle and his pull up shooting. You can't do anything with him. You're just helpless. He's a 72nd percentile pick and roll ball handler and a legitimately good passer, and still defensively a legitimately good rim protector. He's holding opposing players 7% below their average field goal percentage at the rim. He also has managed to still give you elite playoff production over the last couple years. 28, 8, and 5 on 61% true shooting. Are there some super big physical wings who can pose some problems for him? Yeah, but he's run into some of those guys over the last couple postseasons, in an Aaron Gordon, in a Minnesota defense that was playing such extremely physical defense, applying such intense ball pressure, and still he's given you the production and the efficiency that I just laid out there over the last couple postseasons. And people can look at the Suns' record and they can say, well, how could you have KD this high if his team is so mediocre? They're 32-26 when he plays. They're 2-11 without him. I just watched this dude beat the Cavs, giving them 42, 6, and 8 on crazy efficiency, and Colin Gillespie and Oso Ighodaro and Ryan Dunn were 3 of the starting 5 alongside him. Like, the Suns have done a criminally bad job of building around Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and that's why this thing is inevitably going to blow up. Because there's no opportunity for them to progress to the point where they're a serious playoff team, even though I still think they have the 7th best player and the 17th best players, where I have Devin Booker in basketball. That's why I'm excited for KD to find a new situation, because I think as long as he can maintain this level, people will have him higher on their lists next year if he finds that right basketball situation, because this production, this efficiency, this offensive value on and off ball that translates anywhere. KD makes a case for being the best plug-and-play star in NBA history. The ease of fit with him is just so perfect, and he's still a plus defender. Like, he's doing all the Kevin Durant stuff, man. Like, he's not doing what Kevin Durant was doing in OKC, obviously, in terms of the rim pressure and getting to the line, although he still gets to the line at a good rate. But he's doing the Kevin Durant stuff that he's been doing for the last few years. The team around him just sucks, and everybody's lower on him because of that now. And I do think he's getting treated a bit unfairly in these conversations.
The one thing I didn't like earlier was the Warriors/Suns comp, just because I do think the Warriors just have much better depth, but the benefit of having a Devin Booker, KD and D-Book still do enhance one another. They make each other's jobs easier. They make their lives easier.
Everybody around them sucks, though. But okay, I'll say that KD was in a better offensive situation than Steph before the Jimmy trade. But he definitely didn't have a better roster. I mean,
Yeah, that's the
team
only.
sucks because they're a horrible defense.
I also don't think they were either good. I don't think they were good teams, either of them. Pre Jimmy
Yeah.
trade, and just the Suns still suck now. But
Yeah. My point, though, would be like KD's production efficiency offensively is always elite. And if you put him out there without Book, per 75 possessions, he gives you 32 points per game on 64% true shooting. But he's also phenomenal with Book. He's phenomenal with or without anybody. He's just one of those all-time great scorers, and he's still doing that.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from KD, and it was super close to me. You say your 7 through 10 was close. My 6 through 11 were all really close with these guys, where they could almost be interchangeable for me. So I don't want to say anything to disparage KD or like hone in on. There's so many good basketball players in the NBA today. That's why KD ended up at number 11 for me. That being said, the reason that I went with those other guys, AD, I prefer his two-way skill set, where I think he's a better defensive anchor, and I like the physicality that he can play with. LeBron, I still prefer his athletic and physical advantages that he has at this point in his career. Steph, I still just think is a better offensive player in terms of not scoring night to night, but just how, again, he shapes the defense. With Ant, the downhill pressure. With Wemby, it's the two-way stuff. It's super close between all these guys. I still think KD is an excellent, excellent basketball player, but somebody had to get the short end of the stick, and it was KD. KD was the guy that I had to leave off.
I would hear the case for Steph, absolutely, because I do think he's the more impactful overall offensive player still, but I do think that KD is more consistent, and I think that KD has the two-way advantage. LeBron, it's super close because you have the playmaking edge with LeBron, obviously, but I do think that KD is still a significantly better scorer, actually. I think that his volume and efficiency this year is going underrated. It's completely absurd. I do think that he's an easier fit in any offensive situation, even though LeBron is also a very versatile offensive player. And versus Ant, I mean, there's just a maturity, there's a polish that I get with him, the scoring efficiency night after night, because nobody can take away his God-given shot making that is just one of a kind in NBA history. That's why I have him here. It is
nobody
very
can
close.
take away that burst that Ant has on ball, where he can just explode past.
Ant takes it away from himself sometimes when he decides he doesn't want to drive and he just wants to be a pull-up shooter. And he's a phenomenal pull-up three-point shooter, but you get him to those intermediate shots, and you're winning if you're the defense. When it comes to college basketball in March Mania, one thing is for sure. Nothing's for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderella's advancing, top seeds going home early. It's all going to happen. Bet the unexpected, every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook.
With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out the matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. And if it's your first time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly.
Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. I do think the top 5 is very clear. Not necessarily the exact order, but the players who are in that club. Who do you have in your 5 spot, Logan?
I've got Jayson Tatum, and I really considered, with the level that Tatum's been at recently and the level that my number 4 guy has been at recently, I really did consider Tatum being higher, but I think there's a significant offensive gap. That being said, this isn't a super original thought. I'm sure someone has said this before, and I've heard them say it, but like...
Someone said everything, man.
Nothing
matters.
So real.
Yeah.
Tatum is so malleable. He's so easy to build around. He does so many connective things. I'm sure you did. I'm sure we both did at some point in time. Somebody probably said it in the Discord.
Everybody's already said it.
In a hypothetical redraft, if you were starting like a 5, if you were just going to like pick up 5 basketball players, I could hear Tatum going very early off the board, just because it's like I can see Tatum thriving in so many different situations and so many roles. He just works. Because he impacts the game in so many different ways, as a defensive player, as a rebounder, as a playmaker, as a scorer. He just can do everything for you, and so it makes him really easy to fit alongside other players. The real leap that we've seen from him this year, one is playmaking. I've never seen Jayson Tatum so comfortable with the ball in his hands and so it's hard. Like, it's hard to take the rock from Tatum this year in a different way that it hasn't been. He's a much better ball handler. He's also just a smarter playmaker and decision maker. Right? He's really good there. And you see this with a lot of wings. We saw this with Kawhi early on when he got to the Clippers. We saw this with Paul George over time as a wing. But we're seeing it with Tatum, and Tatum has taken a real leap there. But I also think the consistency of his scoring has gotten better. That was the big theme of last year's playoffs. I trust him more as a scorer this year. Where is he going to have an off night in the playoffs? I'm sure. And people are probably going to magnify it. Maybe me. Maybe I'll get inflammatory, and I'll do that to Jayson Tatum. He'll probably have an off night or two in the playoffs. It's inevitable. And Tatum's not a perfect scorer. But I do trust him much more than I did last year. His shot came back. But more importantly than that, I think there's other areas that he's better. He's the number 12 isolation scorer in basketball this year. He's the number 16 post-up scorer in basketball this year. He was an 85th percentile spot-up scorer this year. He was the number 1 handoff scorer in basketball. Like, I trust him more attacking mismatches. I trust him more out of the post, even though he was excellent there last year. I trust his shot more. He's an elite playmaker. He's an elite defender. He's a great rebounder. Like, Tatum just checks all these different boxes for me, and Tatum's never a guy that I feel like is not giving me maximum effort. I always feel like I'm getting 100 out of Tatum every single night. I feel like he is pedal to the metal, balls to the walls. He's giving me all he's got every single night. And like I said, with the level that the guy that number 4 has been at, just with his shot and his overall impact, I would hear an argument, but he's such a transcendent offensive player that I left him short. But Tatum's so damn good, man, and he's going to impact the game, even if he's scoring the ball or if he's not or if he's having an off night. I know what Tatum's going to give me, and he's such a good basketball player.
He's the most versatile player in the league, and I honestly don't think that that's really up for debate. He's versatile as a scorer. He can kill you as a pull-up shooter from beyond the arc. He can kill you attacking mismatches and isolation and can utilize the mid-range. He can kill you with his back to the basket, playing more physically on post-ups. He can kill you as a driver, beating slower-footed players off the bounce. He's extremely impactful with his playmaking, where he has grown to be legitimately elite. In my opinion, since the All-Star break, he's averaging 7.3 assists per game, and like, he can pick apart basically any defensive coverage that he sees at this stage. And I feel like his versatility is very, very well captured by what he did in the finals last year, when I thought he should have been finals MVP, even though he was so off as a scorer, because look at what he's doing. Defensively, he is your center, where you can switch him 1 through 5 and you can negate any of the advantages that Dallas wants to be getting out of pick and roll. And then offensively, he's your point guard, and he's targeting Luka Doncic, and he's blowing by him over and over again, and he's creating great shots for his teammates. Like, that's a very special thing for one basketball player to be able to fill all of those roles. And I do think he's gotten even better this year. I do think that he really took a leap as a playmaker last year, and you saw that in the playoffs, but I think that he's taken another little leap this year. He's improved even more there. And what's really impressed me has been his performance in a lot of big games this year. If you think about how he's fared against top competition, there's really 3 teams who I've considered like the big-time title contenders, who I would put in a tier 1 there. And that's, of course, Boston, that's the Cavs, and that's the Thunder. When Tatum faces those other 2 tier 1 teams in 6 games, he's given them 32, 10, and 6 on 58% true shooting. I was so impressed with his performance in the last game against the Thunder, against a number of coverages, punishing them for playing drop by finding Al Horford off the pop, picking apart their zone and finding open shooters consistently. Like, whatever they threw at him, he was able to have an answer for, punishing switches against some smaller players. He's just ascended to that level offensively, where I do expect him to be consistently a great guy. And it's possible that his pull-up jumper just leaves him like it did last year. We have seen Tatum have some of those very untimely playoff shooting slumps, but last year really was an extreme example of it. I mean, I think that he was like 30% off the catch and like 27% on pull-up threes. That's not who he is as a shooter. He hasn't even had a great three-point shooting regular season, and I'm still more confident in him, far more than I've ever been before. He just looks so comfortable attacking any defense, making the right decisions with the basketball, and that's the level that he's progressed to, and it's honestly been great to see. So can he carry a team with the sort of like volume that the top 4 guys can? No, right? There are guys in that top 4 who are basically unstoppable as scorers, who are all-time playmakers. Tatum isn't either one of those things, but he is a damn good scorer. He is an elite playmaker. He is one of the 15 most impactful defensive players on the planet. Maybe like he can be the best scorer, rebounder, playmaker, and defender on a championship team. That is extremely valuable. I don't know how you keep that out of your top 5.
Yeah, well said. I agree. I think I misspoke earlier. I said Tatum was the best handoff scorer in basketball. I think he's 21st. The next guy on my list is.
And with all those numbers, you're just talking about efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
That's just points per possession. Okay, I do think that's worth noting because it's not like Tatum is necessarily
exactly
getting a bunch of handoffs.
When I say that, it's based purely on efficiency and not on total points scored out of those play types per game.
Tatum's tough, man, because I do think that he's been very divisive, but I feel like now that they've gotten the title, and I know that we were engaged in some of the discourse war with Tatum because I do think certain people overrated him last year. I feel that he's probably underrated now. I definitely don't think he's overrated. And I feel like, okay, they won the title. Now we should just be able to settle in and appreciate who Jayson Tatum is as a basketball player. Is he a beneficiary of the best supporting cast in basketball? Absolutely, and that has to be acknowledged. But is he also the most versatile player in basketball who has a lead impact in all these ways? Yes, and he's one of the best possible guys you could just drop in to Boston, where they have so much aggregate talent around him. He just fills the specific holes that they need on both sides of the ball and brings that elite winning impact. So, yeah, he's locked in this top 5 for me, but I do still think the top 4 guys are all just more like special, all-time talents. That's really what they all are in their own way.
I agree. One of those guys is Luka Doncic. He's the guy that comes in at my number 4 spot, and I think Luka would be higher, but he just hasn't been super efficient with the Lakers. 41% from the field, 36% from deep, just 56% true shooting, and hasn't gotten downhill as much to the all the way down to the rim. But Luka is one of those tier 1 offensive players to me. He's one of the most special offensive players of all time, just blending that all-time scoring impact with the all-time playmaking. He was the number 9 isolation scorer in basketball this year, the number 11 post scorer in basketball this year, and the number 1 handoff scorer in basketball this year. That was who that applied to, and he's an 85th percentile spot-up scorer this season. Luka is one of those tier 1 offensive guys, and just you're talking about that's the delineation I would make between like a guy like Tatum and a guy like Luka. If we're putting them in like a super optimized situation, maybe you go with Tatum because he doesn't have those glaring holes that Luka has, right? Where he can get picked on defensively and he's not super impactful in those other areas. But if we're just taking not like bottom of the barrel, but we're taking an average team, Luka can make that average team and turn them into an elite offense, which is something that I don't think Tatum can do if his situation wasn't as great around him. They're both great basketball players, but I think Luka can just take offenses to all-time heights. I mean, I think you've seen that impact with the Lakers and how he's completely transformed that team. And, he makes Jackson Hayes playable, and he enhances Austin Reeves, and he manufactures all these easy looks for his teammates, and he just makes life so much easier for everybody around him. Tatum does the same thing, but just to a different level, where Luka really does it to an all-time extent. And if Luka was shooting better, I think it would be hard to put him lower than 3, honestly. I think that if Luka was more efficient, that he would definitely have a real argument for 2 or 3. It's just the level that he's been at recently with Los Angeles that keeps him from climbing higher for me.
That's interesting. I moved Luka down to number 4 earlier than you. In fact, I think I did it before Luka had come back with the Lakers, just because the top 3 I thought were all playing at such a special level, specifically the one guy who moved above Luka this year for me, that being SGA. Luka is still the second best player in basketball, in my opinion, when he's right and when he's playing at the level that we know he's capable of.
Oh.
Yeah. second best offensive player in basketball. He's the second best passer in the league. I mean, it is just unbelievable what he sees at his size, his ability to disguise and make skip passes that nobody else on the planet can make, his ability to free up rollers. I mean, every time that a defense sends two to the ball, Luka is just going to pick them apart. He's going to look off the weak side shooter and he's going to move the low man over in that direction, and then it's just a wide open roll for the big man, and he's going to get an easy look at the rim. Like, he just manipulates defenses out of pick and roll at a higher level than any other player in basketball right now. And then as a scorer, we know the ceiling that Luka Doncic has. I mean, he can just completely barbecue you. He's 6'7", thick, strong, such special change in pace, such special touch. Like, he is incredible there. But he's not as consistent as, for example, an SGA. And you mentioned the jump shooting. Like, that has become increasingly key for Luka as he has started getting to the rim less and less. There's been a lot of talk about him losing a bit of a step in terms of his ability to get by people, which I do think is true. And we've seen that over the last few years. I mean, his rate at which he gets to the rim has dropped by like 40% or something. It's way lower than it was a couple years ago. So that means that he has to be great as a pull-up shooter, which last year he was. It was his best season ever as a three-point shooter. And as a pull-up shooter overall, he was over 52% in terms of effective field goal percentage. That's really good. This year, he's at 46% effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers. That's not good. And a couple years ago, he was just under 50%. So that's kind of the key question for determining just how great this version of Luka, who doesn't get to the rim as much, is. Is he an elite jump shooter, or is he just like a pretty good one? And I can't fully confidently take a stance on that yet. But I do think that you saw last year in the playoffs the volatility that comes with him being more reliant on the pull-up jumpers. And yes, of course, he was banged up throughout that run, but you saw some of the stretches like against the Clippers where he can't hit a pull-up three. And then he's barbecuing the Timberwolves because he's making everything in terms of his pull-up and step-back threes. And then he really slumps and struggles again against the Celtics. Like, there is a volatility there that I don't love when we're talking about these real upper echelon offensive conversations. But I still think his playmaking is so special that he's probably my number 2 purely offensive player. But he's not perfect there. Like, he is very ball dominant. He is a high turnover guy. He is not a super efficient scorer. This year, he's been league average efficiency. Last year, he was more efficient. But throughout the course of his career, Luka's never been a super high efficiency guy. So he's incredible offensively, but he's just flawed enough to where I prefer SGA's two-way value, who I think is a top 3 offensive player and then also a legitimately plus defender, and who also has a higher floor in terms of his all-around impact, in my opinion, game to game. And Luka's defense is still an issue, in my opinion. He has his stretches where he's solid, like when he first got to the Lakers. I thought he was being active. He was using his hands. He was using his length. I think his defense has been bad again lately. I think that when you get him in a playoff environment against a really good offensive team, they are going to do everything they can to pinpoint him, to make him guard high-level players in space. And I can't forget what we saw against the Celtics last year. I can't forget what we saw in stretches against the Clippers, even though he had some good moments in that series as well. But, like, you're going to involve him in the action, and I do think you're going to mostly get good results doing so. I couldn't really put Tatum in Luka conversations just because, like, if we were talking about purely this year, of course, Tatum's been better than Luka. A lot of people have been better than Luka purely this year, but like, this guy just averaged 34, 9, and 10 on 62% true shooting last year. That's all-time stuff. One of the best guard seasons of this century and of all time. And like, you got to respect that. You can't put him any lower than that just based on a smaller sample size in which he's been not quite the same player that we're used to. But I do prefer the top 3 guys. I mean, my number 2 through 4, it's all very, very close. They are all absolute superstars. But I am going to have Luka at number 4.
I tend to give Luka the benefit of the doubt. You're talking about the jump shooting stuff. I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. Like, I think long term, This year, I would chalk it up to inconsistency in terms of just playing, like availability. It's hard to get your jumper in a rhythm when you're not playing night to night. And then last year in the playoffs, even though it was on for certain series, I would just say injuries contributed to it. I think I know that Luka's got elite touch. Would I like?
I just think like it is important to note last year he was very different as a pull-up jump shooter than he's ever been. I mean, there was a significant difference in efficiency. And I'm not saying that he can't replicate that whatsoever. And I do think he's certainly a better jump shooter than he's shown on average this year. And I mean, he just had a crazy performance.
I'm just saying long term, I think that was.
You think last year is who Luka is? You think he's going to be that good as a jump shooter every year?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is a step down from what I expect Luka to be at.
No, I totally
agree. I think
agree.
This is the absolute bottom of the barrel that we're getting from Luka. I'm not saying that. I don't know. We'll have to see if that was an outlier. I just don't think it's going to get worse than this.
I totally agree. And that's why I couldn't have Luka lower than this. Because, again, if we were just ranking this season, he would be. But that, to me, is just
well, and I think some people still might
done before.
I think some people still might take issue that he's this low. I think that Luka's fans are that rabid, and I think that some people might look at this and go, well, he beat SGA in the playoffs last year. How is he lower? I think some people would take issue with that. I just think SGA is having such a phenomenal year that I couldn't do that. Enough to the point where I don't have SGA in my 3 spot. I have Giannis here in my 3 spot.
Here we are. I, by the way, have the same ranking. I have SGA at number 2 and Giannis at 3.
Yeah, I just think SGA is having that great of a season. Giannis is also having a great season. I don't want to brush that under the rug either. He's averaging 19.6 points in the paint per game. That's the most of any player in basketball. We've seen Giannis also take a leap as a mid-range jump shooter. He's at 46% out of the mid-range. Now, is it butter smooth? No, it's a little herky-jerky, but it's normally wide open. Why? Because you can't give Giannis the lane. Like, you're going to concede that jumper every time if you're a defender. And he's gotten good at making the defense pay for it. We've also seen him steadily improve as a playmaker. We've seen him take a leap over the past couple of years, but I think he's taken another one this year, making skip passes from the paint, the low block and out of double teams. I think he's just more fundamentally unselfish, which I really like, just laying down easy passes to open players. I also think that Giannis just understands how to weaponize his gravity better than ever before. He's got more of a willingness to use DHOs and to set screens. Like Giannis he understands it now, Carson. He gets it. I really think he understands it now, man.
That was super weirdly intimate. Why were you looking right into my eyes when you said that?
I was looking into your eyes. I'm looking into the camera. I can't see your eyes, but
feels like you're looking into my eyes. I mean, I don't mind it. It just caught me off
my
guard.
bad. I misread the situation. My bad, bro.
Christ. Taking that straight to
Giannis, I do think it's important to mention that, like, theoretical Giannis is probably better than actual Giannis. And what I mean by that is I think people would take, like, the best versions of Giannis. This is the best offensive Giannis ever. There's no doubt in my mind. But I think, like, 2018 to, like, 2020 is probably the best defensive version of Giannis. And so I don't think we're still getting that. I think we're getting a good defensive player, but I think it's not where he was at his peak level. And so that is an advantage I would give him over Luka. He's an unstoppable offensive player at times. He's the best offensive version of himself, but he is still giving you good defensive value, but not peak defensive value. He's the number 14 roll man in terms of efficiency this year. He's the number 3 cutter in basketball in terms of efficiency this year. The 2 guys above him are just better offensively in historic fashion. I think they're 2 of the best offensive players in NBA history, and that's why they're 1 and 2. And it's no knock on Giannis because I still think he's giving you great two-way value. The two-way gap to me doesn't offset how unstoppable 1 and 2 are offensively, and that's why I had to put Giannis here at number 3.
I have Giannis at number 3 as well. It's an incredible peak that he's at. I mean, 30, 12, and 6 on 62% true shooting with very good defense. That's a rare thing in the history of this game. He is absolutely the best he's ever been offensively. Of course, he's absolutely dominant at the same stuff that he's always been. One of the greatest transition forces we've ever seen. One of the greatest rim pressurers and rim finishers that we have ever seen. But his playmaking is the best it's ever been. He really took a leap there last year, but is just at his playmaking peak, not taking any threes. So he's cut all of the inefficiency from his game there, and he's 46% for mid-range, which is just a weapon that he's never had in his arsenal before. So he is the best that he's been offensively. The one problem that he does have offensively, the free throw shooting, man, is bad, and it's been bad all year, just 60% from the line. And I would also point to a lack of flexibility in the half court compared to some other really high end guys. I
Just
do
like
think
his limited impact is like an off ball scorer, or
Yeah.
when the ball's not in his hands.
I would say the off ball limitations. I think if you look at the areas in which the fit with Dame hasn't worked out, you see a lot of the issues that I would take with Giannis's offensive flexibility, not being an impactful player away from the ball, so needing to have the ball himself a lot, which means that a guy like Dame isn't going to be at his most impactful because he is at his best with the ball in his hands. And then I do think that the Dame Giannis pick and roll got a little bit better this year, but like Giannis still doesn't like to screen a lot. He slips a vast majority of screens. Like he's not as impactful there in terms of the two-man game, enhancing and complementing a great pick and roll guard like Dame, as I thought he would have been and as I would have liked him to be. Defensively, he is still very good. He's not dominant. He's not all defense caliber, but still a good secondary rim protector, still a good sort of free safety defensively, holds opposing players 7% below their average field goal percentage at the rim. Just not quite as quick as he was at his peak defensively, not as destructive as an interior defender where he used to hold players like 15% below their average at the rim, which was insane and made him a legitimately elite defensive anchor. He's not that guy anymore. His impact is still phenomenal. I mean, the Bucks are 9 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor because he is such a great two-way force, but it's extremely valuable to me that I know what I can get from you in the half court offensively in the playoffs against great playoff defenses. And SGA has just gotten to the point where the offensive gap in his favor compared to Giannis exceeds the defensive gap in Giannis's favor. Like, even though Luka clearly is a much better half court offensive player than Giannis is, that gap to me never exceeded the two-way gap. Now SGA being a legitimate plus defender and being one of these all-time great scorers and offensive players gives him the edge, because defenses just can't do anything with Shai. And there are a lot of teams that Giannis leaves helpless, but then there are certain matchups where you just watch it and you go, this is the challenge with him. Like the Warriors game that we saw last week. You get a team with a Draymond Green or even with like a Kevon Looney, right? These guys who in terms of strength can match up with Giannis relatively well, but are going to play off of him and are going to basically bait him to take pull-up jumpers, or they are going to force him to deal with a crowd on drives. Like, you can induce more off nights from him. He can have some tougher matchups. I think about what we've seen Bam do versus him defensively. Another guy, again, who can be a key component of building that wall, who can match him more physically. Like, he just obviously doesn't have the half-court skill of these other guys we're talking about. Not even close. And even though it's great that he's added the mid-range jumper, if you get Giannis to take the mid-range jumper, that's still a win every single time. That's still 0.9 points per possession. That's still below average half-court offense compared to a Giannis drive to the rim, which is elite efficiency half-court offense. So that's the thing. It's great that he's improved from mid-range. It's still not going to move me enough to the point where I feel that differently about him in the half-court offensively to have him over a guy who is at the sort of special level that SGA is. I do think SGA has passed him this year.
Well, I think that says less about Giannis's limitations than it more does say about how great SGA is right now.
I totally agree.
SGA is one of the most complete scorers and greatest offensive players ever, and people may take issue with that, but I think last year we saw the ascension. I think this year is the apex. I think he's my MVP right now still with the team success that Oklahoma City has had, although this might be the closest MVP race of my lifetime between these two guys. But SGA is having a ridiculous season. He's giving you 33, 5, and 6 on 52, 37, 90 splits. 64% true shooting with just 2.5 turnovers per game. It's the sixth most efficient 30-point per game season in NBA history. This season, SGA became one of just 7 players to have 20-plus points in 60 straight games. You know, we were talking about the low point for Steph this year. SGA's lowest scoring game this year was 18 points. It's just so ridiculous how consistent and how efficient he has been this year.
Mm-hmm.
Another crazy stat. SGA has the fewest turnovers per game in a single season in NBA history by a player with his usage percentage or higher. Like most guys at his usage percentage are at 3 or at 4, maybe creeping up near 5. He's at 2.5. It's the lowest of any guy that is equal to his usage percentage or higher. You get into certain play types. He's the number 1 pick and roll scorer in basketball this year. He's the number 6 isolation scorer. He's the number 4 handoff scorer. And it doesn't matter the lineup that's flanking him. That's also ridiculous. The Thunder have a 129 offensive rating with SGA without J-Dub. They have a 125.2 offensive rating with SGA without Chet. And the final component to me that has really hammered home how much better SGA has gotten this year, you can look at the scoring, you can look at the efficiency, you can look at the numbers. I would look at his improvement as an off-ball scorer, and that's where I've been most impressed. He's the number 5 spot-up scorer in the NBA this season, and he's a 52% catch-and-shooter. Last season, SGA was a 37% catch-and-shooter. That's a 15% leap off the catch. That's massive for a guy in a single season, and it just opens up the world and how you defend this guy. Like, maybe last year's strategy that you could have enforced, try to get the ball out of his hands, try to make sure that he doesn't touch it. There's just no real good answer for SGA this season. He is unstoppable as a scorer, and he's a damn good player. He's one of the best offensive players on the planet, and most people that would have a season like this would be the best player on the planet. It just so happens that this peak of SGA is coinciding with one of the greatest basketball players in NBA history, and that's no slight at SGA. Again, I think it just speaks to the greatness of the other player that's at number 1, but these are 2 all-time offensive players and all-time scorers, and I would hear an argument if somebody wanted to have SGA as number 1. I would hear them out just because he's having such a great season this year. That would be, I think, the foundation of the argument, is that this season has been so overwhelmingly dominant. But I'm not there yet. There's a guy that I think is just better and having, I think, an even better season in a vacuum. But with the team success, that's why I would give it to SGA, the MVP award.
MVP.
So my MVP is not who I think the best player in the world is.
Yeah, I still think it's pretty hard to make a case for SGA as the best player in the world just because he's going up against the best offensive player.
I'm just saying, this is such
time.
a historic season. I also think that Jokic is just having such a historic season, but it's ridiculous what both of these guys are doing. And I don't want to get into that's what, you tweeted out something earlier, Carson, that, people talking about the hate. I hate it just because I just want to appreciate so much it is ridiculous what both of these guys are doing in the same season right now.
It is, man. SGA is having one of the greatest seasons of all time. I've said it a number of times. I think he's having a top 2 guard season of this century. He's having one of the greatest scoring seasons that we've ever seen. The guy is averaging 33, 5, and 6 on 64% true shooting. It's all-time efficiency at this volume. He's one of only 6 dudes ever to hit 32 points per game on plus 7% relative true shooting. You mentioned fewest turnovers per game at his usage rate. It's also the fewest turnovers per game ever by a 32-point per game scorer. His efficiency across play type, it is ridiculous. He is like 90th percentile basically in everything. Not just in the half court, but also obviously one of the best transition scorers in basketball. And at every level, he is completely dominant as a scorer. He is a dominant rim pressurer and rim finisher. Shoots 71% in the restricted area and has the second most makes there among all guards. You cannot stay in front of the guy. He's the shiftiest player in basketball today. He has the best balance and body control in the paint. His ability to spin and navigate these congested areas with his footwork and then finish with his insane length and touch. Like he's the best downhill guard in the sport. Then you look at floater range, okay? If you can keep him away from the rim, he shoots 50% in the paint outside the restricted area and has the 4th most makes among all guards there. In terms of mid-range, like it's him and KD on a tier of their own in the NBA right now. He shoots 51% from mid-range and has the most makes among guards. His footwork there, his ability to stop on a dime.
And TJ McConnell.
Shout out to TJ McConnell. Shout out to TJ McConnell. But SGA is unbelievable with the threat of the drive, the ability to decelerate so quickly, to step back. And by the way, I mean, he can barbecue out of the post too with his step throughs and his fadeaways. His footwork there is so incredible. And of course, the difference this year compared to last year and previous seasons, he shoots 37% from three on 6 attempts a game. And like his ability to threaten the drive, his ability to get a low ass crazy shin angle and then step back on you from three. I mean, he just manufactures some wide open looks for himself from beyond the arc. He's the most complete on-ball scoring guard ever, in my opinion, with that dominance in so many different ways at every level.
Over MJ.
Well, it's just partly a product of era, but MJ obviously never utilized the three like this.
You just mean complete because of the 3 levels?
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah. Well, and also I would say the number of ways that he can get to all of these shots, the totality of his bag. We've never seen a ball handler at 6'6" like him, but specifically versus MJ, I do think just the utilization of the 3 is a difference maker. But he's a top 10 scorer of all time, and he's impervious to matchup, in my opinion. That makes him an all-time offensive engine. Is he an elite playmaker? No, he's a good one, though. He is legitimately a good playmaker. I think you see that, especially with his ability when he draws 2 to the ball to slip some little pocket passes and get the ball to Isaiah Hartenstein where he can then facilitate. But when you just draw that much attention as a scorer and you're as efficient as he is and you take such great care of the basketball, and you're also a legitimately good passer, like you are going to enhance your team offense to a historic extent. You mentioned, I mean, how insanely good the offense has been with SGA on and any of his key teammates off. We're talking about like best offense in the league sort of results. His individual production is also insane. Without J-Dub, he's not just producing this 128 offensive rating. He individually is giving you, per 75 possessions, 41, 6, and 7 on 68% true shooting. If you just put the ball in his hands, 75 possessions, that's the best estimate of what a star player would play in an average game. That's what he's giving you. Without Chet, per 75 possessions, which keep in mind is a majority of this season because Chet's missed so much time, he gives you 36, 5, and 6 on 65% true shooting. And he is now 38 and 7 without Chet this year, and he's 8-0 without J-Dub. Like, of course, that's a testament to the totality of OKC's roster, and their defense is phenomenal. But for the offense, he gets an overwhelming amount of the credit for that. The ability to do it down his best teammates doesn't matter. Just gets a good shot at will from anywhere on the floor. And, of course, he's really good defensively, gives you 2 steals and a block per game, good rim protector with his size and length, forces steals at a high rate, very active in just that insane OKC defense. He's probably like their 6th best defensive player, but that's just because they're a historic defense. He's legitimately very good. And you see that with the impact, where they're 12 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. So compared to Giannis, who does fill up the box score and who does still have a really high defensive impact, I feel like regardless of the matchup, I'm more comfortable betting on what I am going to get from an offensive master and surgeon in the half court like SGA, where teams are going to be scrambling for answers. They're going to be trapping him when he passes half court, right? They're going to be fully roaming off of remotely questionable shooters, just saying we need anybody else to beat us, mixing in a zone. And still, the OKC offense has persisted and been really good against any of those coverages when SGA is on the floor. And I just feel like he can walk into any series and he can produce an elite team offensive rating and he can give me 35 points per game on 65% true shooting. And the floor is unbelievable. It's one of the greatest scoring floors we've ever seen. You mentioned the 20-point streak. Like, he never, ever effectively has an off night. It's ironic I'm saying that because he just had like his worst game of the year, and a lot of people have come out, and I guess that's their Super Bowl, SGA having one bad shooting night, even when they still beat the Clippers down Chet and J-Dub.
That might be the funniest, like, just thing in the basketball sphere, man, is taking one box score from one NBA game and
so
acting
lame,
like
dude.
it's the be all end all. Like that is legitimately that's the funniest thing about NBA discourse to me is like having one box score be like the be all end all for an argument.
It's so annoying, and all of the Shea discourse is so annoying. And I know that people are
He's the
going to
new
say we
guy.
have him too
He's
high.
the new guy, man. For some reason, I
Yep.
don't get why it gets so toxic like this. It's like if you don't have a championship or you haven't been to the finals, it's like nothing you've ever done in your career matters. And I think it's so ridiculous because I think that's what a lot of people would argue with this is it's like a reputation thing almost where you have to earn like this top 5 or top 3 spot or whatever your ranking is, and they would go, oh well, Tatum has a championship so he should be higher. Oh well, Giannis
Yeah.
has had a championship, right, and he's already climbed the mountain, he should be higher. Luka went to the finals and beat SGA. To that I would just say there's no good argument against SGA that you could make to me that he's going to get worse in the playoffs. Like his game scales perfectly to the playoffs. I think he is gonna rise to the occasion. Like you said, man, his floor is just so damn high. There's nothing you could argue against me, or there's no evidence, of a game of SGA's in the playoffs that you could present to me that would make me feel any differently about it. I just think SGA he's a new kid on the block, and I guess you have to earn your respect. But to me, he's already earned it. SGA doesn't have to do anything further accomplishment wise. He doesn't have to win the MVP to get my respect. He doesn't have to win a title to get my respect. What he's done this season has done it for me. I don't need an accolade or an award to, cement his greatness to me. Like again, you were talking about top 10 scores. I think some people would blow their top at that and they go, no way, no. He's there. He just is.
Yeah. I mean, it's historic production, and like you said, I think it translates perfectly to the playoffs. I talk about the Dallas series last year a lot, but if you have a team that is totally loading up the paint and is ignoring all of your shooters, or in some cases non-shooters, and doesn't really have to worry about anybody else as a creator offensively, and you still barbecue them because you shoot 55% from mid-range and your pull-up 3 is on, and you give them 32, 8, and 7, like, that is a dude who is built for the playoffs, who no defense can take away. When you are all-time great at getting the easy stuff at the rim, at the line, and you are also all-time great at the hard stuff with your difficult shot making from the mid-range as a pull-up shooter, that's a combination you almost never, ever see, and SGA has it, and it makes him one of the most special scorers and one of the most special offensive players ever. I mean, it's no disrespect to Giannis. It's no disrespect to Luka. I don't think either of those guys got worse. I would have had them as my number 2 and number 3 players last year. I get Luka's having a worse season, but I don't think he's actually regressed. SGA has just gotten better, and I've always been high on him. I mean, he would have been my number 4 guy clearly last year when some people might have had him lower, but this is different what we're seeing now. He's gotten better as a playmaker. He's gotten better as a pull-up 3-point shooter. That's a significant leap, and he's just unstoppable. But the most unstoppable offensively is number 1, Nikola Jokic. Let's see if we can keep this tight, Logan. Let's see if we can limit the glaze. Why is he still the best player in basketball?
Well, I was gonna say if you're not interested in a Glaze Fest, you might just want to plug your ears for this one because that's what it's gonna be.
What else can we do?
Jokic this year is giving you 29 points, 13 boards, and 10 assists on 58% from the field, 41% from deep, on 65.9% true shooting. 12 players in NBA history have averaged 29 points and 12 rebounds a game. 5 players have averaged 29 points and 10 assists per game. 2 players have averaged 12 rebounds per game and 10 assists per game, but only one man has averaged all 3 together. And this season also just happens to be the 5th most efficient 25-point-per-game season in NBA history. If we get really specific, it's the 2nd most efficient 29-point-per-game season ever. That's just behind 2016 Steph Curry. I don't know anything new to say about Nikola Jokic. I think he's the greatest scorer and greatest playmaker that I've ever seen. His greatness has become...
He's the greatest scorer that you've ever
Not
seen?
the greatest scorer.
Okay.
Actually, he might be.
Whoa.
Well, that I've seen. Not like retrospectively, but like live in the moment. Like
Kevin
if
Durant? Pete Kevin Durant?
It's close, man.
I actually do think that SGA is a better scorer than Jokic now, but I do think that that's close.
I think Jokic is unselfish in this. Like, it kind of concedes that edge to SGA. I think Jokic is so consciously looking for the playmaking so often that, like, I think you're right. I think SGA probably is a better scorer, but I think Jokic could be if he wasn't so focused on getting everyone involved.
I also just think it's harder to limit SGA's volume than
I was going to
Jokic
say,
because
too,
he's a perimeter player who's able to initiate every possession off the bounce, as opposed to a post-up player is a little bit easier to double and whatnot. But part of it is mindset. I mean, that's why you see a volume
SGA's also
gap.
just hunting his shot the entire time.
Yeah, he's just so damn good, dude. I don't know. I mean, I do think that Jokic, I've been saying for years, is the best scorer on the planet. I just think that SGA surpassed him this year. Like, this combination of scoring volume and efficiency and the confidence I have in it translating to the playoffs, it's all time. I think they're both top 10 scorers of all time. I will say that in terms of peak.
They're 1 and 2 to me right now, and I would say take your pick. But Jokic's greatness, similarly to SGA, I feel very similarly. It's become so routine that we can almost take it for granted, where he's doing this on a nightly basis, and you just sit in awe. These are the good times. I'm blessed to be a part of them. Don't take them for granted. We were watching, I think, 2 of the greatest basketball players I've ever had the pleasure of watching, and I just think Jokic has the edge right now. I don't know, like, if Jokic continued and stayed at this level, like, what do you think it would take for SGA to do to surpass him? Is that even possible?
I think it would have to be a playmaking leap to the point where it's like he is one of the elite guys there. Now, again, he doesn't even need to be an elite playmaker to be an elite offensive engine, but I do think one advantage that Jokic has over SGA is his ability to impact the game offensively at an elite level in so many different ways, right? SGA, you praised his off-ball scoring. I think part of the catch-and-shoot stuff is just small sample. I mean, he doesn't take a lot of catch-and-shoot jumpers, and I don't consider SGA to be a particularly good off-ball scorer. He makes quick decisions, and he's so efficient on ball that, like, it's phenomenal. But he is relatively ball dominant. Jokic is going to be so impactful as a screener for you. He is going to be so impactful as an offensive rebounder. He is going to do a lot off ball. He'll curl around screens at a volume that you're not going to see from SGA. So I do think that Jokic has more of that all-around offensive impact, and I don't really know if SGA can ever match that. Jokic is just one of a kind in NBA history, and that way, because he's got a skill set from a big that we've never seen before. So
it would take, sorry, not to put words in your mouth, do you think it would take regression from Jokic for SGA to surpass him?
Maybe. I will say one advantage I do think that SGA has over Jokic as a scorer when we're talking about limiting volume. Jokic is a phenomenal jump shooter, but you do see certain spots where, like, just because his release is slower, if you get really elite athletes who can kind of swarm him or who can really close out hard or make him think they're going to close out hard, so he tries to hit them with the pump and go, but then they're in position to deal with the drive. Like, I would just say there are ways to make Jokic uncomfortable as a jump shooter from the perimeter, and there are ways to make his scoring game a little bit clunkier than you can with SGA. I mean, we're totally nitpicking here because I think these are the 2 best scorers on the planet, but that is one advantage for SGA that comes to mind, just his fluidity and ease as a ball handler and creator from the perimeter. But yeah, man, I don't know. I guess Jokic would probably have to regress a little bit, and SGA maybe could get even better defensively just with, like, full-on buy-in, but I don't even know if that's possible. I don't know, man. SGA is amazing, but I just think Jokic is still better because he's the greatest offensive player that we've ever seen, and he's having the best offensive season that we've ever seen. I mean, you mentioned, man, 29, 13, and 10 on 66% true shooting. That's unbelievable. He's the best passer alive, clearly, in my opinion. He is the best post scorer alive, and that's where I think, like, if you can't send help, okay, if we were to make those rules, if you're only playing ones, what's the most unstoppable action in terms of just this guy's going to get a bucket no matter what? If you give me an SGA ISO versus a Jokic post-up, I'm still taking a Jokic post-up just because the strength.
They're actually the exact same
In terms of points per possession?
1.09.
Okay, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
That is hilarious.
I would take Jokic just because that strength is so overwhelming. The touch is so absurd. The craftiness with the fakes and the footwork. It's still close, but he's definitely the best post scorer. And he has been so good as a jump shooter this year. Like, I was saying Jokic was the best offensive player ever last year, and then he got better. Now he's averaging 1.2 points per jumper. He's 52% from mid-range. He's 41% from three, and he'd be better than that if he didn't attempt 3 times as many heaves as anybody else in basketball. So that's insane, the level of weapon that his jumper has been this year. And his paint touch is the greatest we've ever seen. You see that with floaters off the roll. You see it with his ability to get to his hooks out of the post. You see it off offensive rebounds, but he's shooting 56.5% in the paint outside the restricted area. That's best in the NBA of anybody who is top 50 in attempts there. And that's a down year for Jokic. He consistently sits at 60% plus, which nobody else touches ever. And another area in which he's been crazy impressive this year is running inverted pick and roll, where he's been a 90th percentile creator and just constantly puts the defense in a predicament. If you go under, well, there's a chance that he gets that 3 ball up quick enough, and he's shooting that at, again, above 40% this year. If you try to send 2 to the ball to avoid a switch, well, he's going to pick you apart with his passing. If you do switch, well, he can back down a smaller guy. Like, that's as a center, man. That's as a center who's also the best post scorer and an elite jump shooter and an elite off-ball player in so many ways. Just nothing you can do. And that's why he's having the best offensive season ever. And the impact numbers reflect that. I mean, the Nuggets offense is more than 22 points per 100 possessions better with Jokic on the floor compared to off it. That's, I think, the craziest number that I've ever seen. And he is also, to me, absolutely the most reliably great offensive player in the postseason, because of his physicality, which scales so well, because he does consistently ramp up his aggression as a scorer. Since 2021 in the playoffs, he gives you 30, 13, and 8 on 62% true shooting. We have just seen him go through some of the best post defenders on the planet in single coverage like they are tissue paper. And when his jumper's on, like it was in 2023, that's the greatest offensive playoff run that we've ever seen. So you kind of have to hope that his jumper's off like Minnesota got last year, and then maybe you can hold him to whatever, 28, 12, and 9 on 60% true shooting. Like, it's just an offensive floor. It's an offensive standard that I legitimately don't think we've ever seen in the history of this game. And if you were to make an argument for SGA, I think it would have to be predicated upon his defensive edge, which for this year, if you're talking about like the MVP race, that's fair because Jokic has had a down defensive regular season. And he has his limitations there. He's not a good rim protector. Obviously, he's not quick guarding in space. But I do know what level he can get to defensively when he needs to, how great his hands are, how great his IQ is, how great his defensive rebounding is, how good his positioning is when he's engaged. And it's a solid defensive player. It's a guy who can be the center on a really good defense, like we saw in the title run, like we saw last regular season. And so I just can't say that SGA's advantage there surpasses Jokic being the best offensive player ever.
Holy glaze.
Know,
my God.
I thought I was going to be able to keep it in check. I don't know. Did I do okay, or was that just obscene?
You kept it in your pants, though, man. That's all I needed.
It's funny, man, because I feel like a lot of Jokic fans now are really mad at me because they think I'm like an SGA glazer. And I'm just like, look, man, these are the 2 best players in basketball. I'm in awe of both of them. I love watching them both. God forbid I praise 2 historic
appreciate
seasons
another
at once.
Basketball player.
I know.
Oh, my gosh. I was just going to say, the best thing that you can do against both of these players,
pray.
Go to church and pray that you don't guard them. Exactly.
Was that actually what you were going to say?
Exactly. Go to church and pray that you don't have to guard those guys because there isn't a good answer. That's why they're 1 and 2 to me.
There isn't a good answer. There really isn't. And I think it is going to be extremely difficult for anybody to slow down SGA in a playoff environment. I mean, even if you get a super physical perimeter defender, he's just so great as a shot maker. I mean, SGA plays physical as well. He uses the offhand as aggressively and effectively as anybody in basketball. And it's like, all right, if you make him take 15-footers, guess what? Nobody outside of KD is better at taking and making 15-footers. And you're not going to be able to keep him away from the rim. Maybe you can limit his volume there a little bit, but he's still just too hard to keep from getting great offense so consistently. But Jokic is Jokic, and he's still number one. So there you have it. Our top 30 players in the NBA. Should we go all the way from 30 to 1, Logan? Should we read it back for the people?
Yeah,
Do you have that in front of you? I have it in front of me. I'll just
let me
do
pull
mine.
up my list.
All right. Go back and rewatch the first 2 episodes of this series if you haven't seen those already. But at number 30, I have Jalen Williams. 29, Domantas Sabonis. 28, Trae Young. 27, Cade. 26, Jimmy Butler. 25, Cat. 24, Chet. 23, Kyrie. 22, Darius Garland. 21, Porzingis. 20, Jaren Jackson Jr. 19, Damian Lillard. 18, Tyrese Halliburton. 17, Devin Booker. 16, Kawhi. 15, Evan Mobley. 14, Donovan Mitchell. 13, Jalen Brunson. 12, Zion Williamson. 11, Anthony Edwards. 10, Wemby. 9, Steph. 8, LeBron. 7, KD. 6, Anthony Davis. 5, Jayson Tatum. 4, Luka Doncic. 3, Giannis. 2, SGA. And 1, Jokic.
My list at 30, I had Ja. 29, I had Fox. 28, I had Trae. 27, Cade. 26, Garland. 25, Jaylen Brown. 24, Triple J. 23, Halliburton. 22, Cat. 21, Chet. 20, Kyrie. 19, Porzingis. 18, Jimmy Butler. 17, Damian Lillard. 16, D-Book. 15, Donovan Mitchell. 14, Evan Mobley. 13, Jalen Brunson. 12, Zion. 11, KD. 10, Wemby. 9, Ant. 8, LeBron. 7, AD. 6, Curry. 5, Tatum. 4, Luka. 3, Giannis. 2, SGA. And number 1, Nikola Jokic.
It's interesting we ended up with the same top 5. I wasn't sure if we would because I really didn't know if you would have SGA above Giannis because I didn't know if I would have SGA above Giannis before we started doing this. I decided I would have him above Luka a couple months ago, but Giannis is historically great, man. But so is SGA.
Yeah, I thought about having Steph. I thought about some of those offensively oriented guys, but I think Tatum's earned that, man. I wouldn't have felt right leaving Tatum outside of the top 5.
Honestly, one of the easiest spots on the entire list for me, Jayson Tatum at 5. I feel like he slots in there very, very cleanly. There's no way anybody followed us both just reciting our top 30. That's too many names to take in at once. But, of course, go ahead. Hopefully you followed along throughout the 3 episodes, and you can see all of these graphics. We'll post them across social, and you can argue with our full lists there. But this was a lot of fun, man. I'm really excited, and I'm interested to see how the playoffs affirm or challenge any of these rankings. And maybe we'll revisit them in the offseason and see what changes, because I know that something will. The playoffs are always very telling, and that is going to be a whole lot of fun. So we'll be back to just talking basketball. No more ranking the top guys come Wednesday. But this was a lot of fun, man. I'm glad that we did this. If you want more of our content, you can find it everywhere. On YouTube, you can see all of our full shows talking about the NBA and the NFL, mostly the NBA right now. Of course, you can also listen to all of our shows across all audio platforms. And on our YouTube channel, you can see all of our video essays, video breakdowns that we do where we go more in depth on one topic. You can also follow us across social, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh to see clips from the show, graphics from the show, and of course, all of our short form trivia content. And you can join our Discord if you want to be with the gang. Logan, who are you talking to?
Juju is growling up a storm. I'm telling her to shut her trap right now.
Well, don't ever talk to a woman that way. How dare you? Well, anyways, yeah, check out our merch if you want. That's at breakingtea.com, and that's linked in our link tree. And with that, as always, I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.